spoke English, and then the ones where we needed a translator. So I decided right away, I better keep my translator happy. My husband, who's outside, fought with the translator the whole time. I would, because the translator kept wanting to take smoking breaks. I would just let him take smoking breaks. And they would be waiting on me, you know, like, oh, Professor Lacey, would you like a Coke? Would you like this or whatever? And I'd make sure the translator got a Coke, right? And so he and I, it all went smoothly because you are only conveying, your translator could be saying anything behind your back and you have no idea. The other thing that happened to me there is that it was very cold. It was wintertime, freezing cold. So I'm walking along the Danube River to the university. It was right on the river. And I think it's just too cold. I'm going to go in the building, get in the elevator and go up to the floor where I'm teaching. So I get in the elevator, ancient, tiny elevator. Only two of us can fit. And the elevator goes, stop. And I think, oh no. And this is before cell phones were so prominent, and certainly not in Hungary at that time. Although the young man in the elevator with me did have a cell phone. So anyway, so we're in there, like literally, like one of us, I finally need to sit down, but I can't sit down unless he sits down, and we don't speak the same language, and you know. So we're in there. Finally, after about 45 minutes, I hear my husband's voice. Baby doll. He's not allowed to call me baby doll in front of students. He's calling me baby doll in front of all the administrators of the program. We're panicked that I'm trapped in this elevator and I'm supposed to be teaching. Plus, how are they going to get me out? Baby doll, are you okay? Are you okay? Finally, there's no red button because, of course, when the elevator stops, I think, where's that red emergency button? Oh, in this country, they don't have red emergency buttons. Okay. So luckily, the young man manages to get hold of someone, and finally somebody comes, I'm not kidding you, with a crowbar. And they crowbar the doors open. Now we're stuck between floors. So John's down there going, jump, baby doll, jump. I'll catch you. Now, you've seen my husband, so I don't think that he was actually going to be able to catch me. But anyway, it lives in infamy, the whole situation of it. Looking in hindsight, it's humorous. And they said to me, can you still teach? I said, I need half an hour to eat a little lunch, and then I'll teach. But yes. So don't get stuck in an elevator in a developing country because there is no emergency red button. It's worth climbing the stairs. All right, so any other questions on security definition? Okay, so what we had, of course, prior to the 1929 stock market crash was unregulated securities trading. The government did not regulate it at all. And that not only led to the crash of the stock market, but it also led to the Great Depression, which was many years, almost 10 years of tremendous poverty and struggle and for my grandparents, they lived through it and were trying to support their children and so forth. It was really a tough, tough time. So in 1934, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Congress were working on how to regulate the securities market. We don't want government controlling it, right? But government is regulating it. Now, what does resales mean? The only part of the law here which is focused on the ethical wrongdoings that occurred is we're going to look at stocks that are out in the market already and are being resold. Could be Disney, it could be Netflix, another stock that would have been great to invest in about 15 years ago, right? It could be any of these companies. And so we're only going to concentrate on these resales. There's another whole set of laws for what they call initial public offerings. And that's a completely different situation, and it's also regulated by government now. All right, so we know, right? We have if you are trading a security, right? Here's what you must do. You must file with the Securities and Exchange Commission, probably you know this, detailed financial statements that are annual reports and quarterly reports. And that's what you saw in both these cases, right? A huge focus on the financial statements and the profitability that they show in the annual reports and quarterly reports. Now, there are anti-fraud provisions throughout, as Congress was looking at the wrongdoing that led to the stock market crash. Then, and that's why we need ethics, not just law, the law was a response to those wrongdoings. And so they were looking at the kinds of things that were being done. And there was a lot of fraud, quite frankly. There were two things. There was fraud and there was a lot of borrowing money to purchase securities. And so people were ruined. I mean, literally people in New York City on Wall Street were jumping from buildings that they were so financially ruined. So lots of fraud. So how do we prevent that fraud going forward? So general anti-fraud provisions are throughout the Securities and Exchange Act of 34, because inflating or falsifying information on financial statements is very, very tempting for two reasons. You can really benefit yourself if you're a large shareholder and a company officer, right? And also it seems like a victimless crime. You don't see the face of the person you're defrauding. And also it's not that hard to do, right? And so for all of those reasons, it is always an ongoing problem to prevent fraud in the securities markets. And we see this time and time again. And we see the ethical wrongdoing. And then we see the public say to Congress, do something, look at how the economy's been hurt. And then Congress adopts more statutes. And it's this cycle because they're very clever, brilliant people. The guys that, oh, yes, Tony. Oh, I see your hand. Yes. Did you have a question, Tony? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. My question is, even with the SEC, fraud is still going on, because to me, I find like if they're supposed to, like, you have different people going over different people's books that are not, you know, in connected with each other, how does this still continue?
Are you referring to the fact that you have to have your financial statements audited if you're trading them publicly?
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes the auditor is going along with it, like in Enron. There was, right now there's a big 4 accounting firms, right? There used to be a big 8 when I was getting my master's degree. So these firms have fallen. And one of them was Arthur Andersen. And you may have seen in the film, if you recall, that David Duncan was the audit partner. Okay, when you're the audit partner, right, you're supposed to be independent and unbiased, reviewing and certifying the financial statements. And your office is not in your accounting firm, but is in the company that you're auditing. Something's wrong right there, right? You're too close. So basically, what was happening with David Duncan is he would say, as a consultant, I think that this, we won't use the word scheme, that this plan should work, Andy Fastow, and as your consultant, I recommend it. And then he audited Enron doing what he, as a consultant, had to say. So there was no independence any longer like there was supposed to be. So sometimes lack of independence of the auditor, right? Okay, that's one. The other is that it's, for example, I attended a conference in the last 2 weeks and we were all talking about Bitcoin. Okay, so there's changes in what the securities or financial markets have due to technology. And I said to the, presenter of the paper, I said, it seems to me, what's the underlying value in cryptocurrency or Bitcoin? Like, it seems there's no substantive underlying value. It's not like there are assets of buildings and receivables and so forth. And so, we're going to see fraud in the cryptocurrency or Bitcoin markets. We're going to see a big problem down the line, I predict, because right now it's not regulated. So changes in technology allow new frauds to be developed. So I think it's a multitude of factors.
Okay, thank you. Because it just kind of just like, if I have somebody that's randomly checking my work, like it just, to me, I'm like, how would I get away with it? You know what I mean?
Well, and you would be surprised at how far people are willing to go in fraud. My husband had a case where I'm trying to remember the specifics. They were saying they had a lot of, let's imagine, inventory at an address in Alaska. And there would be, correspondence between the quote office in Alaska and the office in the main 48 states and so on and so forth. And so, the auditors can only do a random sample. Let's say they're looking at inventory of a massive, like imagine if you're auditing a pharmaceutical company right now, right? And there's massive amounts of vaccine. So you can't sit there and count every vaccine. So you have to do random samples to try and figure out what's the inventory of vaccine that's going to be ready to go out and be shipped. So if they're trying to defraud you, it's not that hard because you can't follow every single step. It would be so costly to the company to have that kind of an audit. It wouldn't be worth it. And so anyway, in the case that my husband had, it turned out it was a fake office in Alaska. They generated fake, but until somebody in the auditing company flew to Alaska and then went to that address, then they realized, but that wasn't the only place where inventory was kept. And so, they assumed that based on their sampling, what the quote Alaska warehouse had seemed reasonable. So, I mean, there are very clever, well-educated people trying to cheat the system, sadly. What is it about human nature? Is it greed? What is it that causes people to go to those ends? A lot of times, and I may have said this to you before, but I can't emphasize this enough to you. Legal and ethical wrongdoing in business is not necessarily that one day you jump off the cliff. It's small incremental things like we're behind in profits this month or this quarter. So we'll just quote plug it for a month and then we'll catch up next month. And next month they don't catch up. And then it's a quarter and they've cheated. And then and so they get in deeper, 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 deeper. Now, I'm not using that as an excuse for the wrongdoer, but I'm just telling you that typically, right? And the other thing is they use rationalizations. They're not telling themselves, I'm a greedy bastard. No, that is not what they're saying to themselves, right? They think they have a rationalization as to why they're doing these things. So anyway, does that answer your question, Tony?
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling, the links. I'll always remember that. And you wonder this as a faculty member with students. So my father we were poor, starving potato farmers from Ireland, my family. And so my father won a scholarship. And so he was in the honors dorm of Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, first person to go to college. And so there was a fellow that was an engineering major in that dorm. Rather than study the material, now this goes way back to the 50s, rather than study the material, he created an elaborate watch that had the answers in it, and watches in those days, you would wind it. And so if he put nearly as much time into studying the material as he did into creating that cheating watch, and as professors, we're having such conversations about cheating right now. We know as professors that test banks are sold online, and students have the test banks. Accounting is one of the worst areas for that kind of cheating, but it goes on in other disciplines as well. And, how do we, if the whole system cheats, it's like universalizing again, then the value of a Cal State Long Beach business degree will go down in the hiring marketplace. So it always seems like, who am I hurting anyway? A victimless crime, but wrongdoing usually does have some negative impact on someone. So there are always clever people willing to think of the new way of wrongdoing. All right. So more things about this statute. And so you do need to know this area of law. It's important for any business person. When I tell you you're the business leaders of tomorrow, right, no matter what organization you enter and lead, ultimately, you're going to have to deal with budgets and records of your financial doings. And so everyone, business major or not, probably ends up in a job where they're have to have some awareness of creating budgets and using financial statements. So here are the things that I want you to know. There are general anti-fraud provisions in Section 10B. We'll go over that in more detail later, but you do need to know. SEC Act of 34, Section 10B. The one that regulates, quote, insider stock transactions is Section 16B. Now, I will tell you that insider, who knows what I mean by an insider?
It's someone that gets information from within the company and uses it in the stock market before the public knows about it.
That's right. Excellent, right? So it's someone that has information in the company about something. It could be a geology company, a mining company. The geologist knows they've just discovered a big copper mine in South America, in ABC Mining, and the geologist goes out and buys stock in his own company before the announcement. And then the announcement of finding the new copper in the mine in South America comes out, and the stock price jumps way up and he makes a profit. In the Disney case, you're going to see it was right around the time when Disney and Marvel Studios were going to merge. And sure enough, a lot of times, who are the insiders? Clearly the CEO, the CFO, right? Top management. Other employees that know that something major is going to happen that would shift the stock price. The key thing is it going to make a difference in the stock price? Now, I would love if I had a tip, for example, to give it to my sister who struggles. She's divorced. She lives on her own. She's an attorney, but she works for the government. I'd like her to be in a better place than she is. But if I have a tip, can I pass that tip on to her? No, right? You cannot pass on or trade in inside information. And so if I do pass a tip on to her, I have committed a crime. And if she trades on it, she has committed a crime. I have no ill intent. I'm not trying to cheat anybody when I give her the tip. I'm just trying to help my sister. But, right, you can't do that. Who is the victim if I tell my sister to trade on this information?
The general
Person
public.
who bought the
General
shares.
public, right? whoever she purchases the stock from, they might have held on to it a few more days if they realized the price was going to go way up. So we all want to have that stock market tip, but I mean, even Martha Stewart went to jail over insider trading. Do you remember? You guys know who Martha Stewart is? And she went to a country club jail. I think she was, what was she doing? Was she cutting hair, or she was exercising a lot? She was in the best shape. So yeah, I don't think they had her cleaning toilets or anything in there. All right. So what are the criminal? Yes, other questions?
What company did she inside trade with?
I'm trying to remember. Her broker knew something. And he called her up and he said, I have a tip that I can't remember. I'm sure we can Google it. If someone Googles it and comes up with it, inform us all. And
Was
so,
the broker convicted?
Was it what?
Was the broker convicted as well?
Now that's a good question, Campbell. I don't know if he was convicted. He did commit a crime by passing that tip on to her. But of course, who gets convicted and who doesn't get convicted depends to a certain degree on the jury they get, doesn't it? Because you have to show intent and so on and so forth.
Professor, I have a question.
Sure.
How do they differentiate between people who just happened to buy stocks before it went public and people who were like informed that there was going to be a change?
There's a couple of ways. There's a whistleblower. There are now algorithms that the SEC has where they pinpoint action in a stock before a major development that increases or decreases the stock price. It works just as well for a decrease, except you'd have the insider selling off the stock instead of buying the stock, right? So there are different, those are the kinds of ways that I think with Enron, there was a whistleblower, a woman. I'll have to think of her name. Did they talk about her in Smartest Men in the Room? She tried to report to government what she found was going on there.
Are you talking about the journalist who raised that question, like how's Enron making their money?
Yeah, there was that journalist, and there was an insider too. I'll look up her name. I'm going to put that. You always give me interesting things to research. A whistleblower. Okay.
For the Martha Stewart case, if anyone was curious, she sold all of her shares in a biotech company just like a couple days before the FDA said that that company hadn't been approved for like primary pharmaceutical products.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Chris. Very good. Yeah. And so, I mean, as I say, it really seemed the criminal intent here, you know, they look at the intent to sell. Also, then once they start looking, then they go back and they look at emails. It's unbelievable the number of people that get caught by email these days. Did any of you read the article of the peanut executive that I did put up on Beachboard under articles and cases that got 28 years in prison for creating, this goes back to product liability and contaminated food. But yeah, I mean, he got 28 years. We've had other cases of food poisoning by salmonella and so forth, where no one has gone to jail. So sentences can vary based on the evidence. The thing with the peanut executive that causes me to bring that back up right now is there were things in the email that indicated that they knew it was contaminated and they made the decision to ship it anyway. And what was really sad, one of his daughters testified at his trial and tried to say, my dad brought peanut butter home from the factory for us, the family, trying to mitigate the, you know, reversibility argument. but he did. I mean, that was a big signal to the food industry that if you know there's any problem, you need to let government and the public know immediately. So, yeah, emails, whistleblowers, algorithms, all of those things contribute to those who get discovered. All right, so criminal penalties, right? So every time, as I say, right, there's a meltdown, people are financially hurt, the economy is hurt, and so forth, the public says to Congress, do something, and Congress modifies the statute and increases the number of years in prison. So when you think about violent crimes and you compare, right, for a white collar crime here, the years in prison, I mean, that's a long time to be in prison, 25 years for some kind of securities fraud. Now, here's what the prosecutor loves. And somewhere, maybe further on in these slides, I have the cartoon of this. Sophisticated financial fraud, like Enron engaged in, often is difficult to prove to a jury. Imagine that your grandmother's on the jury. Okay. Is she going to be able to understand and follow all the financially sophisticated ways in which the company and its top personnel were engaging in fraud? Probably not. But here's what she can understand: destruction of documents, right? Which is called obstruction of justice. So the prosecutor is in a way cheering when you've destroyed documents, because if they can prove that, they're more likely to get a conviction than trying to prove to a jury that there was this sophisticated fraud going on. The lawyer was a female lawyer at Enron, and I think also one at Anderson, gave the order to shred, at that time, 2001, there were still a lot of paper documents, but also to delete electronic documents. And so for doing that, that's 20 years in prison, right? Another one, obstruction of justice, is lying under oath. And either of those, they're not that hard to prove to a jury compared to the underlying sophisticated financial fraud. Now, one of the things, of course, in all of these cases, right, prior to Sarbanes-Oxley, what the CEO would say is, I knew nothing. I'm not an accountant. That's what Kenneth Lay, he had a PhD in economics from Harvard. That poor innocent lamb knew nothing. Nothing about what Andy Fastow was doing. Somehow he managed to dump all his stock that September, but he knew nothing. That then became called the Ken Lay defense, because it's absurd, right? But the jury may not know. So one way that Congress tried to deal with that particular problem is require CFO certification and CEO certification. So they have to put their names on the financial statement. That's very powerful, because if you can show to a jury, look, Kenneth Lay says he knew nothing, but he certified that these financial statements were correct on this date. See his signature? Then you're much more likely to get a conviction. So, but remember, these changes in the statute and in the penalties occur after ethical wrongdoing. So a lapse then causes, lapse in ethics causes changes in the statute after the fact that hopefully prevents future fraud, but is too late to prevent the fraud in the particular case. All right. There are also civil penalties, okay? So you saw the criminal penalties. Now we're going to talk about the civil penalties under the Securities and Exchange Act and the Sarbanes-Oxley amendments to it. You can be sued, you, the individual wrongdoer, can be sued by the SEC for this kind of fraud or by a private party, right? By the person that in essence you defrauded. One of the reasons, let's take Arthur Andersen, the accounting firm that audited Enron. And let's follow this through, right? So many shareholders were harmed, including institutions like pension funds, so on and so forth. Okay. So what would happen? So they all wanted to sue Enron, right, to get their losses back. But there were so many claims that Enron couldn't pay them all. And so they went bankrupt. So then those plaintiffs, those private parties, began suing the auditor, saying, how did you not, right, discover in your audits that this was happening? And so then Arthur Andersen, and there were many innocent partners, they did not realize fully what David Duncan was doing, most of them. Then Arthur Andersen could not pay all the plaintiffs that were suing for financial harm, and they went bankrupt. So that's what happens that leads to firms going bankrupt many times, is that there are so many lawsuits against them, they can't possibly ever pay for all of that, and they end up having to go bankrupt. All right, so private parties can sue that are harmed also, right? The other party to the sale of the security. So if you buy, knowing, for in my mining example, if you buy the security right before the announcement of the new copper mine comes out and the stock price shoots up, you have defrauded the person that sold to you, because they would have hung on to it for a few more days if they'd realized. So that's, in essence, the party harmed and a party that can sue. What are the civil penalties? It can be the amount of profits lost, or it can be, if there's a willful violation, triple damages. You don't see triple damages under the law most of the time. You only see enough to compensate the person for the loss. But there are a few areas where there are triple damages, and this is one. Any questions so far about the statutes and the fraud and who is actually being harmed? Okay.
I have one question.
Sure.
Can they like Martha Stewart, for example, can they take all the money she made from selling those stocks early, or is it hers now?
Yes. The answer is yes. Because that's one way they're trying to, punish the wrongdoer, which was a different situation than Dick Fuld of Lehman Brothers, because he had a contract that when he left Lehman Brothers, he would get these millions of dollars in severance pay. I mean, one of the problems, and then I'll come to you, Tony, one of the problems also is that by giving CEOs so much stock in their company, the amount of money now that CEOs make compared to their average employee, it didn't used to be such a monumental difference, right? CEOs make something like 7,000 times the amount of money of their average employee. Really, are they that much more amazingly brilliant than all we are? No. So, that's a perverse incentive right there too. So anyway, go ahead, Tony. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Going back to like the person getting like, if the CEO tells the other person to go do this, and like kind of reading that Beans case, how could distress or fear work? Because if you feel like you're in fear of doing something, wouldn't that void out any kind of contract that you didn't sign your name to or anything?
Well, right. The thing that is, and it's not a perfect world. It doesn't always work out perfectly. But if you know that you are being told to do something that is a crime, unfortunately, If you feel threatened or coerced in your job, you have to either quit your job or engage in a crime.
Dang, so it's just you're screwed no matter what. That's just
Yeah, right. And, you know, yes, you are. And that's why we're trying to clean this up so employees at lower levels do not end up in this very circumstance that you are describing.
Because it seems like
And there's all kinds of wrongdoing. With my Cal State graduate in accounting that is a convicted felon in Medicare, Medi-Cal, and financial fraud, you know, he talks about that very dilemma, and that he knew what they were asking him to do was wrong, but he had this, and he got no money. He did not get stock money. He did not get any money. So you don't have to financially even benefit to get convicted of these crimes. You just have to commit the crime. So, you know, there's various other aspects. If you actually steal from your own company, that's the crime of embezzlement. That's different than securities fraud, the kinds of crimes we're talking about here.
I have a question, Professor.
Sure.
So don't people that like insiders and people that commit financial fraud, when they do get caught, they have ways to hide their money though, so that, you know, they go to jail for like, I don't know, 2 years or something, but if they hide their money well, but when they come out, they could still keep a lot of the money that they gained illegally. Like I remember reading something about like they have like really like smart ways to like hide their money.
They do have smart ways to hide their money. There's a banking institution in Europe that I think is very corrupt. I've sat on panels at conferences with these individuals, and it's Deutsche Bank. And so here we can get banking records in the United States through a subpoena, but that's not always true in other countries. And so they can put their money in banks in other countries. You've always heard how Switzerland is one, and there's banks in Switzerland. And you also hear how there are these tax havens like the Cayman Islands, and you can money launder essentially. You're laundering the money. Does that answer that question, Tony?
Yeah, I thought that was
The answer is yes.
yeah.
There are ways. In fact, I once, at one point, someone in an institution in, it might have been a language barrier, but anyway, they wrote to me and they said, you know, we see you have this paper on money laundering. At the time I published my paper on money laundering, it was like the latest research in the area. And they said, we are wondering if you would come and present at our institution in Mexico City and teach us how to launder money. So no, that's not the point of my paper, to teach you how to launder money. Okay, so let's see. All right. So we're now going to talk about these duties, okay? Because part of the wrongdoing is additionally that you are violating a fiduciary duty that you have. All right, so who has these duties? Finance officers and accountants have fiduciary duties, which we're going to describe in just a moment. That puts them at a high level though, right? Higher than the average person. Why? Because they're creating financial statements that are viewed and used to make investment decisions or loan decisions to potential investors, current investors, and creditors. There have been cases, my husband was involved in a case where literally, right, this individual, who was a high-level government individual, by the way, but that also had some businesses, would submit one set of financial statements to the bank to get a loan and a different set of financial statements to potential investors. Do we see any problem with that? Right? It has to be, it has to be the truthful, accurate disclosure, not financial statements concocted for one purpose over here and yet different ones for another purpose over here. All right, so many people make their decisions based on these financial statements. So let's define, and I pulled this from the case that decided this. What is a fiduciary duty? It's this increased duty. And in our system, this term describes the relationship between two parties that obligates one to act completely in the interest of the other. Right? So preparing financial documents on which people are going to make investment decisions or loan decisions, right? You need to be, as the finance officer or accountant, you have a fiduciary duty that encourages you to the highest level that you need to be truthful and accurate in the documents that you create. Any questions on fiduciary duty? If you're asked to be the executor of your grandparents' estate, you have a fiduciary duty. Anytime that you are overseeing the financial well-being of another in some way, the law puts on you. You don't get to pick, I want a fiduciary duty, and someone else says, I don't want one. No, the law is what we call imposes it on you because other people's economic well-being will be impacted by what you do. All right. So let's look at the fiduciary duties then. Okay. The fiduciary has to knowingly accept that trust and confidence. That means that you, when you step into the situation, you know that you're going to have this impact on someone else in terms of financial well-being, and therefore that you take on this duty. Part of the duty, fiduciary duties, are to act in good faith, right? With the best interests, right? Legally and ethically, to act in the other's best interests. Is that what Andy Fastow and Skilling and Ken Lay all did? Well, Ken Lay will leave out of it because he knew nothing. Poor little innocent Ken Lay, who never did go to prison, by the way. Did you see what happened to him and Smartest Man in the Room, why he never went to prison?
Didn't
He
he?
had a heart attack and he died from the stress of it all. Yeah. But what they begin doing then is, like, he had given money to churches. He was such a good citizen, Ken Lay. And he'd given money to universities, the Ken Lay, College of Business, University of Texas, whatever that it was. And so then, universities are in the unpleasant situation of thinking, how do I get out of this contractual obligation that he was our donor and gave money, and now he's a convicted felon. Oops. All right, so the first duty is the duty of good faith and trust. All right, let's see, and this will be our last slide for today. The next one, we'll start here. What the potential harm is to victims, okay? So there's a lot more on these slides than I usually put on a slide, because if a slide becomes too dense, right, the student is going to be overwhelmed with the amount of print on it. So I try to create a balance where you fill in kind of by your own writing, but here there's such specifics involved, and I think it's so important to your future career that I want to make sure that you truly fully have all the information that you need here. Now, general questions. Who can tell me, when is your midterm?
18th.
March 18th.
Okay, it's on your syllabus. It's been on your syllabus and it will not change. I am moving, and I'll send you an email with the new syllabus. I am moving 2 topics around. And by the way, the final exam is not comprehensive. There's a lot of material in ethics and law. And so you're going to be tested on this first half of the material March 18th. Now, obviously, SIMAC goes all the way through because that's your method of analysis. But in terms of the specific topic areas like product liability, workplace liability, and so forth that we've discussed already, they will not be on the final exam. They will be on the midterm. Okay, any other general questions, comments?
So, from my understanding, this midterm is basically all we talked about is basically the slides and the cases, right?
Slides, cases, right, and the slides have the statutes on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the things that I had you read in the textbook, but I'm not going to pull out some remote part of the textbook and test you on it because I'm looking at your critical thinking skills. So
And
we would have to have discussed it in class.
And for the midterm, is this all short answers?
No, it's a SIMAC, the midterm is a SIMAC analysis. Do you mean short answers in the sense of a SIMAC analysis?
Yes, like writing out like paragraphs and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
just like you
Okay.
did on the homework.
Okay.
And once I'm going to start reviewing some of the homework today. Once I start reviewing the homework, then I'll get back to you as a class. I noticed that you're not discussing this, and I would expect it on the midterm. So I can give you general feedback. Normally, I do grade them on a template, but I can't hand those back to you in class. So we're doing the best that we can in this circumstance.
I have a question.
Yes.
Will you be able to have notes regarding the cases and notes regarding the statutes, or is it going to be like a closed book?
It's going to be closed book, lockdown browser.
So we're typing our responses.
Yes.
And is it heavily timed?
Well, the midterm is meant to, yes, you only have the, hour and 15 minutes for the midterm, unlike the 2 hours that you have for the final. But once again, I will be grading it on, even if we were at the university, it's not a Scantron exam, remember the Scantrons we used to use. Anyway, so I grade it based on looking for your critical thinking. But I do expect you to certainly know what your SIMAC is.
And let's say we don't recall like proper law terms or like I would say keywords. Would you hold that against us?
It depends on the set of facts and the set of answers that I'm looking for. I haven't 100% decided exactly which case I'm giving you for your midterm. But yeah, anything that's going to, potentially be on the midterm will be on this exam review sheet. And I think our exam review is actually on the 16th of March. So we're getting closer. Any other general questions about the exam or?
One more question about the exam.
Sure.
We won't need to memorize necessarily specific names, just like their position,
What do you mean by names?
like their like first and last name for like who's like the stakeholders are. We can just like manager or CEO or.
Right, unless I give you the names in a case,
Okay, yeah.
in the set of facts. Anything else? This will not be your last opportunity to ask me questions about the midterm. So with that said, I will let you go. Thank you for your attention today. And we're going to begin class next time, we are going to go into breakout rooms where I'm going to ask you to do some CIMAC on the smartest men in the room. And then some of you I'll give the Aaron Bean case, which is in your textbook, pages 59 to 62. Smartest Men in the Room. As you know, it's available on YouTube. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. It was great to see all your faces. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor.